So, our next speaker, Aleix Morgadas, is an engineering strategy consultant and CPO at Temperature, where he focuses on helping leaders to access their team cognitive load for broader organizational impact. With 10 plus years of experience in tech, Aleix specializes in engineering strategy with domain-driven design, team topologies, and wordly mapping. Sorry if I killed something here. He was being shared his real-world experiences on his personal blog and at conferences, becoming one close friend in our little Latin cluster with Daniel. He's coming to speak the engineering strategy journey. So let's give a hand to Aleix.
They appear? Yes. So thank you very much for joining in this. I guess that there's a lot of information coming today, so I will try to make it as easier or as enjoyable as possible, right? So thank you for the introduction. So I will just skip that part because why I'm doing this is because the amount of things required to learn about the strategy is overwhelming. Or at least this has been my journey. So I hope that I can make it a little more digestible. I cannot remove the pain from learning all of that, but at least I can help you avoid a couple of mistakes or things I did. So indeed, the title should be my own. So everyone has their own journey. I will share mine, and I hope that you can relate and maybe say, oh, I am in this path, what this person did, and then maybe say, okay, maybe I can try this, I can try that, right? That's the reason. So the takeaways for this talk are, if you're starting, I hope I give you some next steps, but if you're already in, you also can have some ideas about how to help others in this journey. So that's a little of what I hope that you can get out of this talk. So briefly, I will say that I started in 2014 on a startup where the goal as engineers were just execute fast. So just execution came with a lot of consequences. I thought that if I can write more lines of code, we can ship things faster as a consultants, we can get more money. Because we had the vision of, with the consultancy, so we can do product. What a mistake. So things go this way, like we were feeling that we were going fast, but to nowhere. When things go wrong, the only approach was dedicating more hours, and kind of everything become either led by passion, but not rationality, and we kind of burn out altogether. And the worst thing is that we can blaming, we don't know why things are not working. So what I learned after years about thinking is I was unable to learn about those mistakes. We blame others, but I was not understanding why this was happening. So a couple of years later, I said, OK, let's understand what others are doing. So we started copy other people. This was 2016 or something like that. So I went to conferences, I went to meetups, and I started copying others. So copying others meant that if we are in nowadays, it means that I will add AI and Kubernetes, I will add platform engineering and event sourcing. If I do it today, probably AI agents, right? And blockchain is already done, so not blockchain. I will probably see that some people are doing layoffs, so a little of layoffs, a little of returning to office, right? This is kind of what people are talking about. So lovable.dev, I guess, that's what we're right now doing. Team topologies, add colors to the org chart, move. So, but then I thought, Aleix, if it's today, I will probably use an LLM to do my engineering strategy. Why you need to copy others? Just delegate that. And I'm very serious. That's why I use the latest model, because, of course, so we are ahead of our competition. So I said, write me a B2B marketplace strategy for me. So let's try if I can delegate that today. And it said that main part is, hey, we need the strategy to form rapid market validation through an MVP. It will take us 4 to 6 months to validate. We will build per tenant scale with microservices with day one. It is super long, but it suggested to start with SOC 2 as well, so just go fast. And I felt like, looks reasonable. Let it see how much it costs, I asked. How much it will be the price. So between 8.5 million and 25 million over 5 years. So like, if people are copying this, we are fine, right? Indeed, I thought I should really increase my rates. So again, I copied others, and then I produced the same bad thing. So again, I was unable to learn from my own mistakes because I was not making decisions. So this is when my actual journey started, when I stopped blaming others and started looking at myself. So, and if you come from domain-driven design, you kind of say, oh, the important is the business. It didn't happen in that order, maybe, but I started, and I want to show why the business and how you can understand the business nowadays. So my recommendation is follow the money. You follow the money, you talk to people that controls the money in the organization, you can have a better picture of why we're doing what you're doing. So in order to understand the business, you need to know if you're a B2B, B2G, B2, B2C, whatever. And this already shapes you a lot of the business. So I was thinking and using the same strategy regardless of the business type. That was a mistake. Same thing. It's very different when you are bootstrap, when you are busy. The expectations change a lot. So we were bootstrap behaving as we were busy. Where we are busy, just behaving as, OK, it's all money, we don't need to report to anyone. So this is also important. Same thing. It's very different when you are services, where you scale by people, when you are a SaaS and you scale by machines. So all of this, I didn't fully understand why the business behaves certain ways. So one recommendation is have these questions with your people in the company. Unit economics, you need to learn about that. What is the long-term value? Which is the cost of acquisitions? Those things shape your business and how the strategy will work later. You cannot think that you're working a certain way, right? And of course, North Star, Red Blue Ocean, there's a lot of things that can help you understand better the business. And focusing on that, it gives you a lot of insights for later. This is a pyramid from Leatarin. So at the bottom there are the customers, like more the B2C kind of business, and then you have the B2B. But I didn't know that there are it's very different when you target the low-level B2B market than the enterprise. The life cycle of the sales is huge, and it also plays a role in your day-to-day. So very recommended to understand, hey, how we're selling, how much it takes us from a lead to get into a paid customer, which is a churn. All these things, it will help you to build better engineering strategies. Same thing with business model. I didn't know that there are business models that kind of scales linearly, like e-commerces, maybe like you sell and then you have a cost and it kind of behaves that way. And then you have others like platforms or Uber, like where you need to have a huge investment and then it takes a while to ramp up, but then the margins are huge. That's when people call the break-even, like, oh, we get the break-even, now we're profitable. When I understood the second model, I understand why people lay off. Because you achieve a break-even faster. So, and we understand why of the reasons why we laid off the 20%. I don't understand the number. Because then we can say, we have break-even, and I can ask more money in the VC. So you need to start understanding how the business people work. And those are some of the tips that I give you to start. But the same thing happened to me. I even understand the business. We are still producing an okay output. It didn't work that well yet. So I will use this analogy of maps with permission, which is, even though you have a destiny, let's assume that you know where you're going. That's the first thing. It's not the same when you are next to the end point than when you are very far away. And I kind of, I wanted to do something like, oh, we want to go here. You cannot assume that you are next to it. You are not maybe a big enterprise. Maybe you are a big startup. So maybe you're starting very far from it. So you kind of cannot assume that you can get there directly. You need to go with step by step. This concept about agents impossible. Like, you cannot overstep it. You need to go, OK, I will do something, so I go to the next step, next step, next step. So I learned that you cannot dream. You need to go step by step. The other part of the thing is that you probably, even though the business says we want to go here, it's not like a direction. It's more like in this area. So you cannot assume that you know when you want to go. It's more like, hey, I think we're going in this direction. That's my hypothesis. So you maybe kind of start considering, maybe I need to do a couple of experiments and see what works and what it helps us to go faster in that direction, because that area is unexplorable. Maybe you cannot, maybe there's a mountain, maybe you cannot go through it. You need to go through the steps. So that is the other part. That is the beginning of the talk. Now we are starting from the engineering point of view. So it was 2018. I joined Domain-Driven Design Europe. And there was two speakers. One was Simon Worley, the other David Snowden. I was there, it's like, amazing. That's what I want to do. was a lot of information. It takes me years to get into where I am now. I am not finished. So I wanted to understand how to understand where I am and where I want to go in the terms of business. So I stopped doing entrepreneurship. I stopped building companies myself, and I joined a company so I can learn from others. Because sometimes you need to admit, like, hey, I need to learn from people that know how this works. So I stopped and learned. And now I will tell you what I've learned through the years, what is engineering strategy. So the good thing about the starting is what is not a strategy. There is an awesome book, which is Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, that tells us this. Where I was reading it, I was like, oh my God, I'm doing everything. I was using overhyped words. I didn't understand the challenge. I was putting goals as they are a strategy, inspirational words, or bad strategic objectives. Things like, we need to deploy an application for a customer that they only have 10 customers. Let's build microservices for this. Like, doesn't make any relationship, right? So it was a good starting point. So there was, I think, was Roger Martins that said, one way to understand if your strategy is good or bad, just negate it. It's amazing how it is. It's like, oh, custom or strategy is going facing customer needs or serving the needs. It's like, negate that. It doesn't make any sense. So the thing is, like, if the strategy is a decision, and if you can negate it and it still makes sense, it starts becoming a strategy. It's like, okay, we are making decisions. So what is in a strategy? So at the end, I will define, or trying to define as you have decisions. Admit that you don't have all the information to make it super well based on data. You always have imperfect data because all models are wrong, right? So you cannot waste on that, wait on that. And it needs to overcome a high-stake business challenge. That, you need to define what it is. You cannot avoid, so you need to at least have an orientation, and at the end, you should be in a better position than before. That's a little how I will define a strategy. But what is engineering a strategy? It is something else? Well, it's not. It's the same thing, but from an engineering point of view. If you have an engineering strategy that doesn't match or it's not coherent with the business one, it's like you have a problem. So you really, it's like, it should be the point of view that you take into account, and then you involve that. So when you try to speak about this, like, if it doesn't feel right that they're speaking different things, or they think that they are different positions, you need to have a conversation why you are not addressing this. So I took a while. If I wanted to add this as a framework, I still developing these ideas, and it's not that I did them. What I do is I get ideas from others, and then try to put them in a digestible way. And I choose this because I want to give you a guideline about how you can start learning about this, and when you practice enough, you don't use it anymore. So the idea is that you're able to practice, give some, okay, I understand the dynamics, and then you leave it, and then you use your own way of approaching this. So let me give you some of the concepts that when I started doing this, I started, okay, I didn't understand this. I felt that I didn't have a word for this. So let's see how I'm doing. Good enough. So the first thing is that the strategy is a cycle. And I don't know why I thought it was quite waterfallish. Like, oh, I decided that for a year because I read that the strategy is the next 3 years. So it's like, okay, we cannot change it. We need to stick to it. The other part is like, if you go through this cycle faster, you learn faster than the competition, right? So that's something else. Then there is something else that I learned, that is, if you have design by leadership on a retreat, then you hand over it, that's not a strategy. That's something else, but I don't know what it is. So, a spoiler here. So the thing is that the strategy, you need to be involved in both cases, because when you design, you have hypotheses, you have bets. And it's through the action of implementation that you learn if it was right or not, and sensing the stuff. So you need to be part of it. That's why handovering engineering design or decisions to others, it is a mistake. Why? Because if you do great, it's your success. If they fail, they messed up. So it is a lose-lose for for the people that execute this, right? So that's something I learned. So this, I learned that from Simon Warley, and that idea just, it makes a lot of sense the more I do it. So that a strategy is a cycle, I also found that there are multiple people in the organization that have different purposes or, like how to say, like strategies for different time lapses. There are people that think at 10 years, but I was tech lead, engineer manager, and then head of engineering. So my strategies, they are never 10 years. They're like 1 year or less. And the thing is that maybe the CEO is looking at that, but probably there are strategies that are closer and closer to the minimum. Because if you're in a company that only does strategy once a year, it's kind of you go through the cycle only once a year, and then you only learn once. If your competition go to every 3 months, they are learning 4 times faster than you. There's something else I learned. Right? Try to go to the cycle faster. So this is a concept I'm also starting to learn, which is it's a fractal. There's a company strategy, has some approach, but then there are multiple ones in the smaller feedback loops. So maybe you follow my VP's or my CTO strategy, but then as a head of engineering, I have another view on what is happening in the organization, so I can build a smaller, more scope strategies following the same pattern with a narrowed scope. So it is okay that you have strategies that falling from strategies that they are enforcing the parent one, because the parent one also needs feedback loops. So try to get this information flowing. So that's if you are in a department or in a tribe, you can have your own engineering strategy if it makes sense for your case. So multiple strategies can coexist and need to be coherent with each other. Sometimes when I have some clients, at least that they are not competing. So if there are sometimes that it's not possible they are coherent, what they ask is like at least they don't compete, right? So, and they can have different feedback loops. So it's okay if mine is 3 months long, and there's another which is 1 year long. That's the important part. So there are some principles that I learned that it was like an aha moment, but it indeed was quite stupid that I didn't thought about that earlier, which is we need to anticipate and explore instead of planning and doing. We need to be adaptive instead of prospective. We need to be driven by value, tech at core, communicate, and collaborate. It was like, wow, it's a strategy following agile values. So for me, that was quite interesting. Like, I treated the strategy as a waterfalling process, and it is not. So I started to say, like, we have a lot of things that we can follow. That's my reminder that we need to follow these principles. And then I found that there are 2 types of strategies in your organization. The deliberate one, the one that is in a paper and is communicating in a whole hands, and one that is emerging, which is like, the deliberate one is like a kind of a wishes, that what you want to head, and it helps you align the company. But then the emerging one is how well trained is the organization to respond to anticipated events. And it's not one or the other, it's both. You need both all the time. Because some companies like, we don't do strategy. You're doing, but it's emerging, and you're not putting everything anywhere. So that's another part. So when you need to invest in a strategy, because when I get to this, I did the strategy for everything. So using the Canadian framework, I realized that if it's a clear thing, you need a pipeline, you don't need a strategy, just do it. If you're in a chaotic environment, you just don't do strategy. You just need to overcome the chaotic environment. So I found that it is in that area that works better following that framework. But the important part here is that it works well in a strategy because it's a complex thing and it's not linear. If it's linear, you don't need a strategy. You just do it, and it's done. So that's the area it works the best. Today, because of another book, I would suggest that learning about non-linear thinking, it is a better way to start on this area. So I started with Canadian. It took a while to learn. I think that Diana's works, it will introduce to this faster than learning all the Canadian first. So learn about non-linear thinking, and you will see why it's very connected to strategy in how I am describing it. So which are the components? And they're based on good strategy, but the strategy, which is they are live in a purpose and a context, and that can be set by the business or whatever you're thinking, but it lives there. And then you have a diagnosis, where you try to understand and describe where you're doing stuff. Then you have a direction. In the book, it says guiding policy. It doesn't work quite well when I do this with developers. So it works better to use the word direction. And then you have coherent actions. And these are the components that you need. It's like, which is the business status, why we're doing this, where we are as an organization, and then where we want to go and what we will do to overcome those obstacles. That's everything you need, right? And I say in between quotes, which is, the purpose can be top-down, or you need to involve people. You cannot do never this alone. And the direction, people want to have the last say by a C-level, or the lead, or whoever needs to decide, which is okay that this feels like top-down, but you need to make it very collaborative, because you want to understand where you're failing. So you need to involve people very early on all this process. So that's why I say all this loop needs to be very collaborative. So the more information you have about the pains of the developers, what is the problem with product, you need that within the strategy. You cannot do that in isolation in a mountain with your leadership peers. So I will give some things like I try to use. And it's always a combination of things. Because when we are in strategy, it's not like only the management design. You need a combination of a lot of tools that you need to choose based on your experience about what it will give you more information so that you can know what is the situation, where you want to go. And then what I tell to people, don't simplify what is not simplifiable. You need to be clear, but don't try to, you need to make it super simple in one word or in one sentence. Never worked to me. And the direction, I'd say direction, but indeed it's more like an hypothesis about why you think it will work, and a set of bets and objectives that can be reviewed. And it's super important that you review them in terms of a metric or a North Star or whatever. But that you need to check how you're doing. If you cannot check it, you will be lost. You cannot know if you need to keep investing. So, and it's not a vision nor an inspirational quote. Please, there's no need on that. And then, career actions, you need a lot of project management skills. And they need to be completed. It's not like, we will do something in the future. No. You need to be able to scope it enough down so you can track progress and verify that the diagnosis is correct. Because it's here where you know the reality. Before that, it's just your wishes. I think this will work. So that's why it's important that you are part of the execution. Because if you're not part of execution, you're missing the feedback. You cannot close it. Right? So that's how we do. We go there with an architecture, we did a team topologies, flow of value, we did a Warley map, then you recheck, and then you know if you need to adapt. That's important. You need to adapt as you learn. So the second thing I learned is that in some organizations like to say, develop technologies by developers and principals, and then management are people and processes. And they cannot talk to each other. It's like you're engineer. I was engineering manager in that time, or head of engineering. It was like, hey, how is architecture? Like, no. This is top-down. Why you're questioning the architecture? Like, what? I cannot talk about this? The same thing. They realizing that they needed more people, or they need to be some new processes, but they were solving that through technology because they were not allowed to talk about processes and people. Important part is that engineering leadership, it doesn't require a role. It can be shared between people, but you need to touch the people side and processes and the developer side. You need both dimensions because the solution is never in one or another. It's the combination of both. And probably when you do decision, you will mess up something else. So it's important that you're able to be in constant exposure to both things all the time. So let's do an example. It's very brief, which is I joined this company as an engineer manager, and they told me, hey, we are very focused on users, we are customer focused, we have the product trio, we have the product, the designer, the tech lead, or we are very that direction, but I want you to help us mature the engineering because they have been unable to deliver it. They have been over-delivering for a year, and we don't have any expectations. So can you help us to just finish it and put it in production? Like, okay, looks like it's a good company, you have a good culture about focusing on users, let's do that. And I had 3 months. That's interesting, because if I give you the time scale, it gives you some, will give you some context about some decisions that I made. So I started to understand the diagnosis phase. And the thing is that if you look at only tech, you always will have problems, because everything is messy. Like, it's a distributed monolith. At least they have good testing. They are custom building things with KTOR and ports and adapters, while the rest of the organization uses Spring Boot with custom, like, this is a messy decision. So you can always find things to blame in tech, because there are hard decisions made, and it is the easy part. right? And they have good CI/CD. But when you go to the human side, you start seeing something like, okay, why there are handovers or handoffs between backend and front-end teams? Why is they are in this way? There are no full-stack teams. So there was one mobile team and 3 other backend teams, and they were handovering everything to the other. Like, why is this happening? Then you ask, where's the leader? Like, oh, that person left 1 month ago, and the previous, they left 6 months ago. Okay, the people are living here a lot. Is this a trap, right? And they will look like a factory teams. So where's the problem to solve here? On the tech side or in the human side? As engineering, I only look at the tech side, I will go for a technical solution for a human problem. So I use, for example, I will present you this Kanban maturity model. And the thing is that I thought that we were in the level 2, customer-driven, and some observable characteristics are like they're having basic management on demand, there are consistent end-to-end processes, marginal errors, and short delivery times. I thought, and I was doing stuff as an engineer manager, thinking that I was there. But being exposed to the day-to-day, I realized that I was not here, but I was there. So lack of order, overburden, stress, manageable individuals, heroics, and unpredictable results. If I don't look at this, I will start pushing people and doing a lot of mistakes because I was thinking I was in a place that we weren't. That is what I learned, right? So that is so based on that information, I said, I see the leadership had a lot of pressure, this is increasing demand, so how I can solve this? So the direction that I decided, it was not written, it was emerging, that is afterwards thought. We tried multiple things, but one big decision was we will start from 0 with a team, with a set of practices and ways of working specific, that I think this will work. So we start a new team. It was about being full stack, and it will reduce some technical complexity as part of the journey. So the current action was start from the hiring process. If you don't understand on the hiring process where we're hiring only specialists and then we have a specialized teams on front-end and back-end and they're separated, I was unable to change that. So I needed to go into what I think is like the early problem, the hiring process. So we changed the hiring process, we isolated the team, and this was super critical. If you put these people in a high-pressure situation, they don't have the capacity to learn. So we went out of the radar from leadership, we put them like in a cave, trained the people, and they started shining. Like, okay, why these people that works in the less priority thing are overperforming the others? So that's what we started doing. And that was thanks to training, because if you hire full stack people, but then you don't train them, it doesn't make sense. Coherency, please. And we started removing some of the accidental complexity. The accidental complexity was a response from the developers about, hey, requirements are changing, nothing makes sense. Which is the architecture that solves everything? Demand-driven design, personalized, hexagonal. It's a natural thing to go when the only way that you have to impact your work is through tech. So you need to understand this as a part of the part. We have been adopting Spring Boot over Git or incrementally. That's also a good thing. There are some teams that said, we will stop the product development for 2 months to rewrite everything from scratch. Our approach was different. Like, no, you will remove that incrementally or replace that incrementally, and we will train the people so that happens smoothly. We had 0 downtime. We replaced a full service, rewriting into Spring Boot as a framework in 1 month, so less time, incrementally, and no bugs in production. So you need to know, like, hey, we need to stop like this, how to say this, destructive behavior about pressuring people, and give some space and some fundamentals to make it faster later. So the overcome was that we have 5-people team working smoothly, full stack. We start showing that we were delivering super fast, and so we gained trust from our leadership. You need to gain trust. So I have to admit that I had a very trustful VP of engineering. She was amazing as a leader. And I think part of the success of this is because I had the support. And she fought the battles with the product people on that level. So you also need to have your back within the organization when you're making decisions that are not that common on that context. So I also need to say that that was a nice thing. So we have team deliverables. We had end-to-end, no hands-off. That was the main thing. Like, we know that handovers between teams doesn't work. We know that we need people understanding the full thing, having ownership. So it was just applying kind of knowing what in the industry works and saying no to leadership, telling, no, I want you to work like this. I want to give you 20 new developers. And what you realize is that if people give you resources to use and you don't use them, you are in trouble. Because if you fail, they said, hey, I give you 20 developers, you didn't use them, you screw up. So it's hard to say no to these things. But I needed to start, based on the information I had, to have some arguments to say, I want to do this because it is clear and that I don't know that works. And I have to admit that was 2022. We had plenty of jobs. If I was fired, there was not a threat of not getting a job. So I have to admit that it also helps to be more bold in some decision-making I had, right? So we start having this culture, or this, it's not a culture, it was more about routine, about sharing how we were doing things to influence others. And several people are starting to leave the company because of this. Because there are good things, but also when you move from specialization to full stack, there are some people that say, like, no, I only want to do JSON APIs. We asked some people to add some HTML, and it was like a huge thing. Like, why is having a problem about adding full stack applications? So that made some people leave the company. And they had a lot of context and knowledge about everything, because we don't have any documentation. So you also have bad consequences of several decisions, but you need to go through them. That's what we talked at the beginning. Non-linear thinking. You try to do something, and then you didn't expect people leaving, and then that happened because you didn't know something. And then you need to live with the consequence and adapt as you learn. That's why it's important having pairing, mob programming, and so on and so forth, so you can minimize the risk of these things later. I'm starting to get into the end because I want to have some space to having some questions. But that's something I learned after the years. That is about when you finish in a strategy, it will position you not only in a new context, but in a new culture. And that was for me like aha moment. So I don't know how to describe culture, so I use this one that at the end is like how things are done here, which I think is quite accurate, what I want to describe, which is using the Tanya really work of a staff engineer path. She described this 6 or 7 dimensions of culture. And any model on culture is wrong, but this one, it gets quite to the point. So just imagine you are, this is a real company of a client of mine, which is, they had a super secret culture, everything was oral, top down, and people started to want to go fast. They have a balance between people DMing people and then using a Slack channels with front stuff. And all the time was allocated, so they didn't have any free time for learning, to help others. It was very hard. And the last one, which means liquid and crystallized, it means about promotions. So there are companies that if you start as a junior, you know that next year you will be mid, and next year you will be senior. There are some companies like this. Liquid means more like a startup, like now I am developer, but maybe tomorrow I'm PM. It's more like allowing this flexibility. And the interesting part is that they were telling, the culture sucks. I need the culture to be this way so that my strategy works. How I can change the culture of my company? Like, that doesn't work. You cannot expect to change the culture so that your strategy is valid. What you will do, invest 1 year on training and agile coaches or whatever to change the culture. By the time you reach that, your strategy is already outdated. You need to start again. It doesn't work. So you need to follow it. Sometimes you need to follow it. And in that case, in that company, means moving to management. That's tough, because not everyone wants to move to management. But what happened in that company is that you need to be in the room. And it was more frustrating, because now that you are in the room, he achieved to be in the room, now you are part of the problem. Because you took that long to achieve this, now you are in this very good position, you are in the room, you make the calls, that you now are following the strategy, the culture. So you didn't want when you are out, when you are part of it, you are keeping this Structure. Remember when you were outside. So he started to move and behave differently. And what happened is that they started creating a strategy with the agile and possible culture, which is we will do everything as before, but now we will start communicating a little more. Because it worked, the next time they followed the new culture process. So it was that success of the strategy said, oh, this works, we want more of that. And that's how you influence the culture, with success and then how things are done. If you're, it works in both directions. It was in a company that was very open, reading bottom up and doing things right. And it was failing a lot. What happened? C-level, we are done. We will follow this path. This is the date. What happened? It worked. You know what's next? It moved all the culture down. Why? Because it worked. And what works, it becomes part of the story. And then we have the problem that when it no longer works, you have this past inertia, and then you have pain to move. But it kind of what happened. So if you are not a CTO and you are an engineer leader and you are complaining about the culture, remember that when you're promoted, are you preserving the culture that you were fighting about? But now because you're part of it, you kind of like it. So if you want, be part of the change as well, right? I'm closing right now, which is, this is kind of what happens. This is my model right now about how I think about this, which is, before you design and deliver to an emerging strategy, you need to take into account culture, that it will guide what is possible and what is not possible to do as a strategy. The business challenge, not the business desires or goals, the challenge will set the context for the strategy, and the current context, which I mean like the developers, the pains, the architecture, whatever you're taking into account, will signal what is possible. You cannot dream, right? The strategy, which at the end is an hypothesis, if you finish, even successfully or unsuccessfully, will impact the culture, will produce a new output, and will create a new context. And this is how I see a strategy, and I hope that you can start seeing like, okay, I understand why this didn't work. And then you can start thinking about that. So, to close, we need to start sharing about the strategies. I don't know what is happening. I go to podcasts, I listen to podcasts, and business and product, they share everything. Like folks, like, oh, we will do this, we are doing that, even though they are not right, but they share and they learn. So we have open source. Why we don't share about our engineering strategies? What's preventing us to just learn about this together, right? That's why I started this, and there are the slides here, but I have a repository, which is Awesome Engineering Strategy, with a lot of examples of people, and books and posts. So I try to make this as accessible as possible, and also I write about this. I'm inviting people to write in here about their strategies, and there are a couple of them coming. So I also invite you to write. But I know that writing is hard. That's why I also have a link that if you want that we talk and I help you to write the engineering strategy for publishing, I'm super happy to help. And that's my talk. So thank you very much for coming.
Aleix, thank you so much. We don't have any questions, yes? Do we have any questions from the audience? We didn't get any from Slido. 1, 2, 3, no questions. That's great. Aleix, thank you so much, man. This is a small token of appreciation, not the iPad, just a little bag.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us and for explaining everything so thoroughly. Guys, we have a 10-minute break. Yes?
When you started talking about strategy in these senses and understanding of the landscape and the environment and all the steps that you went through, what was the general reaction to your colleagues to this?
So when I started presenting this inside, so there was two main kind of, I was lucky that because people were very engaged in this, and sometimes when you're passionate, you find other people that are passionate, and then you create a bubble. So the interesting part is that you find two behaviors. One is like, I want to be part of this, and the other is like, don't tell me about that, get your job done. I don't find the people that don't want to be part of it, that's fine. What I found is that if you start getting 1 or 2 key people in each team, they get excited, their approach starts like contaminating others. It took us like 1.5 years to get enough momentum. But it was super nice that when you leave the space and you're no longer doing it, some people will fill that space, right? So for me, it was finding that people, and then that people believe in this, and they had their own journey and their own pains, but they were able to continue with this. When you lose enough people, then this is lost, right? And I will say that's a success or a failure. I don't know how to say that. But when I was leader of this 6-team tribe, I think 3 people went into management. 3. I guess I doomed them for the rest of their life. But the thing is that people say, I like this type of way of thinking. So when people are exposed to new ways of dealing with information or dealing with decision-making, they like it and they adopt it. But from the top, I didn't have much success. So it was more like a bottom-up thing on patience and training. So I don't know if I remember that answers your question.
Oh, it was a good answer. The reason why I'm asking is that mapping, which you've mentioned, has a habit of getting people fired as a result of mapping out the space and then using it to challenge what the business is doing, particularly if the people that you're challenging are in a narrative basis. I mean, if you go up and point out that walking the troops off a cliff isn't necessarily a good idea, and they've sold the vision of walking the troops off a cliff is the future, then often the result is you get fired. So you said the business lost, which was an interesting choice of words. How did you get any reaction, or were you senior enough within the organization, or were you careful enough to convert this into a more narrative form which supported the existing structures?
Now I get the question better. So the thing is that I mentioned is that I got the support from my VP of engineering. So I was protected of all these high decisions. But the other part is that I was not presenting that as a challenge. This collaborative co-creation, it was super important because I involved the business and involved the product on the co-creation of this. And they kind of, by the story, they realized, okay, now I was a consultant, so I know how to do questions in a way that looks like I don't know enough. So, but you need to have a genuine interest on learning because people are not stupid, but they're super good, but they don't know how to make it, and they have the good willing. Hey, if it is, and the context was, we're late, so I want to do good things for the team, so I will top down everything and make decisions for you, and they are not the best, right? So what we changed is I created the space for collaborative workshops like Lean Inception and others, and people started to, now I understand. And it was interesting. So it was a 4-day workshop where I only asked the VPs of business and product to be in 2 sessions. They were there, and they stayed for the rest of the workshop. Because they were like, I'm able to put the ideas here. And they were able to understand. The developers wanted to understand more, and people were more of that. So you need to create the environment, and you have the right people to have this conversation. And when people are engaged and talking about that same thing, everything flows. So that's how I did it, but I didn't challenge the narrative. I was more like, look, the narrative, and I do questions, and then they adapt and say, okay, what can we do? Oh, did you thought about that? Okay, thank you, because when they say that you are caring about the business, they open themselves. They see you as an ally, and not as something to fight, right? So that's how we did that, and of course, having a VP that protects you helps a lot. Yeah. Cool.
If there is no more questions, then thank you very much, guys, for being here.